You're listening to a nerdy production. Warning, this is a nerdy production. Welcome to the GM Workshop. My name is Jacob. In this series, I want to talk to game masters and game designers all over the world. Because I want to explore game mastering and the different perspectives in tabletop role-playing game. Let's get started. Today's topic is sci-fi, and I'm joined by Rook Glanten from the UK. He is an expert sci-fi GM, a sci-fi fan, of course, and he wants to help us understand how to use the sci-fi genre as a whole, and he wants to talk about Mothership as his go-to system in this genre. But first, we have to present our guest. So Rook, tell us, where do you come from role-playing wise, and what is your passions in role-playing?
Thank you. Yeah, I started playing in 2000. I think it was the Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition when it first came out in the UK. And I was playing with my brothers until we branched out and I started playing with other players. And I played some other fantasy games, and then I started getting involved in Warhammer 40,000 role-playing games like Dark Heresy and Rogue Trader. And since then I've played Stars Without Number, Sci-fi, Lancer, Mothership, GURPS. There are quite a few science fiction games.
That's pretty cool. When you started the GMing, which system or setting was it that really attracted you, and you thought this is my jam, this is what I want to GM and tell story in?
So I've pretty much GM'd for the whole of my role-playing experience, I think, and I prefer running games to playing them. For science fiction, I think it might have been Stars Without Number, because it was very, very easy to pick up for anyone who's played D&D, which a lot of people start with. And it really let you, sort of guided you into making your own star system. It was like an empty canvas for the games master to paint.
Yeah, it's like a huge sandbox system setting tool, right?
No, you won't get any XP.
When you sat down the first time as a GM, what kind of inspiration did you draw your first stories from? Did you draw the inspiration from movies or TV show, books or comics?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think I had read some fiction like Ringworld or Dune.
Oh, Dune, yeah.
But also, you've seen TV shows like Firefly, things like that. That was the kind of... I like the idea of, a crew who are very loyal to each other and go from adventure to adventure to adventure, but you also have that sinister threat that's building up behind them and following them that also works as like, a big meta plot, a big arc in the background.
So the group are together and loyal, and the outsides and the antagonist or the elementals or the plot, as you said, the meta plot will tighten the bond between them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. When you create a story, if you sit down this Friday with your friends or with your play group, first time, do you use a session 0, or do you have other tools to elaborate where you want to create a story together?
Yeah, I definitely use a session 0. I think some players, if they haven't done it before, can get frustrated because they want to sit down and play. But it's very important to sort of make sure that everybody wants the same thing from the game, because especially science fiction, if one person wants to do psychic powers and robots, and the other person wants to do blue-collar astronauts, working for a very bad wage, like Alien or something like that.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that everybody's on the same wavelength, that everybody wants the same thing from the game. And if they don't, then you have to make a game that pleases everybody. There are rules and things that you have to put into place. So I think a session 0 is definitely worth the time it takes.
Yeah. Do you have any tools you use? Some official tools in quotation, but some tools you are better experienced with than others? I
think I've pieced together like a questionnaire that I would run through, and some of them are from official tools, and some of them from talking to other games masters. You will have your no-go areas and your traffic light system. Is it okay if we explore this? So some people will say, I don't like cruelty to animals. Okay, we won't have that. Or can we not have war crimes? Let's not do war crimes, for example. So it's good to get those out of the way earlier. And sometimes people don't know what's going to make them uncomfortable. So you also, you say, well, if anything ever comes up and you don't want it to, we'll have a way of doing it. Whether if you're on webcam, it might be you put your hand up, or if it's over voice, you might say something, or if it's in person, it's obviously easier.
Yes, and it's easier to read the table if some of your one of your players just lean back in the chair with wide eyes and start sweating or something like that. But these tools, these safety tools as we call them, is very important to have in play for, especially if you don't know your players. And especially when we're talking about the sci-fi and Mothership, and especially like it's a horror game and try to create a story it's tight and intensive, but still all players are happy around the table. Balance the intensity and the horror. How do you do this?
So I really enjoy playing horror games, especially games like Mothership. And I would say that I probably only play them with players who there's already a level of trust with them. You can play Mothership with new players. I recently picked up a group of 4 players, 2 of which I've never played before. And I said, okay, well, we could play Mothership. And they're like, yeah, no, that sounds great. So I think at that point you have to very slowly, you can't just hit them with, chest bursters and, the artwork of H.R. Geiger and that kind of thing. You do have to have that slow go, and from the beginning say, if something comes up, you just have to say, that's a red flag, can we not do that? And I remember having a new group for a science fiction game very similar to this, and I said this at the beginning, and it was with people I'd never played before, and one of my players said afterwards, like, I think you were taking it too seriously, it's just a game, what could possibly come up that anybody would have a question with? And it was in the very next session where another player said something that, and a couple of people at the table were like, whoa, that's out of line. It's like, well, there you go. That's perfect opportunity. So with something like Mothership, you don't want to go at 100 miles an hour from the very beginning unless you have a group that you trust. You really need to introduce things slowly, piece by piece, read the room, like you say. It's a lot easier in person. And unfortunately,
for sure,
recent circumstances mean that I think I've run every single game in the last 2 years has been over webcams.
Oh, damn. I've been so fortunate in Denmark. We are very fortunate about the COVID situation. It's been very easy for Denmark to get back to normal. Well, there's a red button. When you are game mastering, what are the key essentials for you to manage the table? One is safety, but how do you try to balance the characters between the story and how much they want to be a part and the agency of the story? How do you balance this in a session 0?
So I think it's the same as when you're playing a session. I'll make sure that every player has an opportunity to speak when no one else is speaking. Prompt that player. If you were to play like a game like D&D where you have combat rounds, everybody takes a turn and everybody says what they want to do. And I just do exactly the same thing with the session 0. Tell me the things that you really, really want to see. If you wanted one scene, if this was a film in your head, and the one scene that really, really had you sitting on the edge of your seat and you were cheering at the end of it, what's that scene? And then, so if they say, oh, I'd like, a giant sandworm bursting out and then my character's just got a laser sword and he needs to cut it in half. I'm like, okay, so that's an idea that we can get into the game. And if somebody else says, well, how about a spaceship that's crashing into a planet and we have to get off it before it explodes? I'm like, okay, great. And you kind of get an idea from that, what the players are expecting, what's exciting to them. And if another player says, well, what about investigating like an ancient religion of a dead alien race? You're like, whoa, okay, that's different, but we can try and work that in. And so write some notes on that and see where each one fits and try and get some elements so that every player gets what they want out of that game. Okay,
that's pretty cool, because normally when I'm GMing, I'm sitting down with my players and I said, this is the story. That's a concept. Like let's see, we were playing aliens and we are playing Colonial Marines, and this is the mission. The players have to make some Colonial Marine characters. So, but you will actually start from the other end. You're trying to sit down with your players and say, I have no ideas. You probably have, but in a vacuum, you don't have any ideas because you want to hear what your players want to experience. But on the other hand, you also use the pre-written campaigns or the pre-written scenarios from Mothership. How did this work in with this concept of game mastering?
Well, so it's, as you say, it's not quite a vacuum because I'm a player too. So one of the first things I will say is, this is what I want to see. If this was a film, this is my scene. So it's making sure. So we can do the same example with aliens. So if I say, okay, guys and girls, let's play an alien colonial marine game. If we were to play this, what would you want to see in it? So I'm still setting a guideline, saying, okay, it's aliens, you're all colonial marines. What do you want to see? And one person says, oh, what if there's just like waves and waves of aliens coming and we have to defend a dropship? Okay, cool. And someone else says, well, what if we're investigating like an ancient temple, like in the Alien versus Predator film? I was like, okay, cool. And then, so that's how I would build it up. So you can still set constraints or set a genre. The most recent game I'm running is set on Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom, from the old like Mars novels from 100 years ago. And I said, like, this is the idea. And the players had never read the books or seen the films or what have you. So I said, well, there are going to be things you're not familiar with, but what would you like to see in a game that has ray guns and swords and is a bit science fantasy? So you can still set constraints and then find out what the players are after within that genre.
So I will try to sum it up. When you are creating campaign, you are creating a campaign framework for your players. And then you want your players to give you building blocks for the story. But if one of your players are giving you building blocks that doesn't fit with the other building blocks, for example, the alien temple in a colonial marine campaign, how do you proceed from that point?
Yeah, and it is a challenge to get to please everybody all at once. So sometimes, the first session might meet 2 out of 4 players' expectations, and then the next one, another 2 players or 3 players or 1 player. But in general, if you have a good group, everybody should be playing for everybody's enjoyment, not just their own. So yeah, it's like you say, putting those blocks in place. But as a GM, you can still set the constraints of the genre or the subgenre or whatever you want to address.
Roll for initiative. When you are creating a campaign or a scenario, is this a mini campaign or is you try to create a longer campaign? What is your jam? Which did you prefer?
There's always a temptation to write a really big sandbox or a big long campaign, but I found the most successful games I've ever run have always started as a one-shot that got wildly out of control when everybody enjoyed it so much they didn't want to stop playing.
Then it became a mini campaign, and the mini campaign became a longer campaign, and the longer campaign became this epic adventure. Or
yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. So you didn't have the big story, the big story arc for your antagonist. That wasn't on the canvas from the beginning, but it ended there.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
I think when I started, like when I was a junior games master, I definitely wrote the big campaign from the beginning. But now I do it the other way around, or I write the adventure and let the campaign build itself.
Yeah, usually you make mini campaigns that slots into another mini campaign, but one of the problems I often run into when I'm playing sci-fi is the technology. How do you make the players cope with the mechanics and the system and the technology, so they all are playing the same movie as we talked about before?
I think that is probably one of the hardest things about science fiction, because there are so many different types. You have Firefly, Star Trek, Warhammer 40,000, Alien, Dune. They're all very, very, very different. And that's just, movies or TV shows. You've got literary fiction. There's such a huge range. So one person has read Starship Troopers, the book, and one person has watched Starship Troopers, the film. They're very different. So sometimes you have to struggle to find something that you can use as a parallel. And someone says, well, I've seen Pitch Black. Is it like that? And you're like, well, it's more like Chronicles of Riddick. And like, okay, well, what if is it like this or is it like that? Definitely one of the challenges, to find fiction that everybody has seen and everybody can identify with.
sure you want to do that? Do you use any frameworks for the characters to help them fit in the story in a better way, or how do you do this?
So usually I will ask them a leading question. So, for example, why are you in prison? Or why are you in the med bay? Or why do you need 2,000 credits really, really quickly? And that is just like a question that the player can answer themselves. So I'm not railroading them well, you are railroading their destination, but not how they get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's fine. It's those open leading questions are pretty cool. You're putting a lot of agency for the players. Do you find players difficult to use this agency correctly or in coherence with the other players and the story?
So some people will find it difficult, but I think if you ask a player, just make a character in a science fiction setting, it's like that's a lot to think about, and their vision of it might not gel with everybody else's or with the setting that you have in mind. So if you give them a framework like, why are you in prison, or who do you know on a space station that, makes super weapons, then that gives them a bit more material to work with. So you're helping them get to the end goal, but you're not pushing them in one direction. One of my favorite things about Mothership, and it's a very small detail, is the trinkets and the patches.
Yeah, they're so cool.
Yeah, those are great. It doesn't matter what you get, you can make something about that. One character gets a harmonica. It's like all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, my character plays a harmonica. Do they play it well? Do they play it badly? Does everybody get annoyed with it? And that's a silly little thing on a D100 chart. It will probably never come up in the game, but it gives you flavor.
It's pretty cool. The Alien universe has some of the same with those. They have some anti-stress items, so that also tells a small story about the character. That's also pretty cool. But I actually used that random table in my last Alien game to find trinkets for or stress items for anti-stress items for the Alien. The concepts of sandbox versus railroad. We have touched on it a little bit, but how do you balance these concepts? Because all GMs are using one or the other through a story. What is your philosophy around sandbox and railroading?
More railroading, and then I tried to do a lot more sandboxing, and I found sandbox is more difficult than railroading because it relies heavily on the players having a direction. So if you don't give them any sort of impetus or momentum from the beginning, they tend to drift. But at the same time, you don't want to just railroad them and say, look, this is the plot we're playing, and hammer everything into it. I started playing a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse style role-playing games like Monster of the Week and Blades in the Dark recently, and that really, really opened my eyes to the way your kind of low prep, go with the flow style of GMing can be very, very rewarding. And I think the most successful storylines have definitely come from that style of just building on the last session and the session before that. So I don't know if that qualifies as a sandbox or if it's railroading. It's very, very low prep.
Yeah, but both Powered and Fantasy Flights, you're not allowed to prepare as a GM, actually, as in the raw sense of the system, right? And it's very fine and very cool. I play a lot of Cold Divinity Lost, and that's the same system. But if I don't prepare, and if I don't make the world alive around the players, like if we are playing in London, I have to Google Map London up, and I have to know where stuff are in London. I have to know how the metro system works, and so on and so on. So we have to as GM prepare a lot more when using this system actually but not in the scenes with the players, because the players' agency and the dice roll brings a lot to the table. So it's a different way to prepare a game.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. You do have to have kind of like a background knowledge of what's going on. So you're creating a science fiction game. You need to know if there are factions moving around in the background. How long will it take you to get from this star to this planet or what have you? But I think I definitely take that philosophy of what would happen if the player characters didn't intervene. and then you can write a step by step. These 10 events or 5 events will happen in roughly this order, and then you can push things that way, and that kind of pushes your games master agenda without railroading the players, because they can interrupt it at any time.
It's a great way to use. The system helps you as a GM to create a story for the players, but the players has to take responsibility of the story as well, and that's sometimes pretty hard for players, and we have to help them in some way. I think it's funny when you put it in a movie. Often GMs see the campaign or the scenario as a movie, but let the players create the story with us. It's fine. We have an antagonist, and we have this cool space station they have to visit, and like a vivid gunfight in a warehouse or a dramatic love scene on a balcony or something. Guide the players to see these things, but if the player agency isn't there, the problem will often be that they lose interest or they feel it's railroading. So the balance between play agency and the railroading. When you railroad, which scenes would you prefer to railroad?
Do you mean like what kind of scenes, or?
Yeah, in a campaign. If you have a campaign idea and your players are just sitting on the tavern and drinking beer and don't want your stupid plot, how do you bring the players into the story again?
So I usually will have a short list of things to get the players' attention, which is like they're driving along and a dead body hits the car. It's like, where did that come from? And it's that kind of thing. Or I think the scenes I like to railroad is definitely the introduction to the villain, because in a way it's like all the players get the spotlight, and then their counter, their foil, the villain, needs to get their spotlight as well, because otherwise you're just fighting like, I don't know, it's just a crazy space plague, or it's just a horde of robots, or it's just these mercenaries. Whereas if you have an actual character that the players can really, really hate their guts, that's what you want. So you can have that cathartic moment where they triumph and go, yeah, we did it. We shot him out the airlock, or, we squashed him with a tank or whatever. That's the part you need.
To present your antagonist. That's one of your railroad moments, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And also usually a big disaster, because a disaster is kind of like an antagonist. So the spaceship falling out of orbit, or the meteorite coming in, or the missile, the bomb counting down, that kind of thing. There are parts that you really, really want, and it's the same as building a player character, I think, because if you write a character with detail, you say, well, I really, really want my character's clone brother to come up in the plot. That's the same as me saying, I really, really want you to have to disarm a nuclear bomb.
There's a concept called the quantum ogre. Are you familiar with this?
No, what's that?
Yeah, the quantum ogre is you as a GM has a plot idea or a story, and no matter where the players are moving, your plot will materialize in front of it. Is this something you use, or you're giving the agency to the players to know? And through a session 0 and between sessions you have talks and so on. Do you use this quantum ogre concept, or do you know?
I definitely use the quantum ogre. I didn't know that's what it was called, but that is a brilliant name. Yes. Like I say, if something comes up in session 0, a player says, let's definitely have, rescue people from a burning building, then regardless of where they go, a building will catch fire. So yes, definitely use that. But as long as the players don't know that it's a quantum ogre.
Oh no, that's of course. But it's our trick. It's our secret. But also these impact points, as before the gunfight in the warehouse or the dramatic love scene. So it's another way. That's another way to guide the players through a story to see these cutscenes as if you view them as computer games. It's these cutscenes also as the antagonist unrevealed themselves in front of them. It's also like a computer cutscene almost. Somehow we have to try to navigate in this quantum ogre, and these impact points is some of the tools. Today's topic is sci-fi, and Rook wants to give us some perspective and his insight within the genre. Follow us on our Facebook page and group, GM Workshop, the podcast. We really want to interact with you, and if you want to talk with us on the podcast, write to us and we will create the frameworks for such a talk.
Oops, you're dead?
As a part of our big theme on genre, this is our sci-fi bit, and with me today are Rook, and he wants to give us some tools and some perspectives of how the sci-fi genre is great for role-playing. So Rook, tell us, why is the sci-fi genre so great at role-playing, and why do you like to create games in this genre?
Because I think the wide range of possibilities. So it still has constraints, but the technology allows you to do so much more. So you can have in one adventure visiting a crazy jungle planet. On the next one, you're exploring a derelict spacecraft. On the next one, you're navigating a culture that you're unfamiliar with, and yet it's still populated by humans. On the next one, you're trying to outthink an artificial intelligence mastermind. There are a lot of opportunities, but if you're playing true hard science fiction, there are also constraints. You can't just magic up whatever you want. You still have to be creative and resourceful.
Within the boundaries of this genre, when you're creating a game, how are you using science as a whole? The rules of physics and so on, is that something you have in your mind when you are creating a scene or one of our quantum ogres?
I don't think I'm not enough of a scientist, and I don't think my players are enough of a scientists to know whether we're paying that much attention to the physics. But I do try to make it make sense, because you still need it to make sense from one session to the next. So in one adventure, you can't breathe air on an ocean planet because the atmosphere is too dense. Then you have to have some continuity so that the next time you're on an ocean planet, it's the same. And if you've come up with reasons for why, gravity never fails on your spaceship, then just keep it consistent. I think that's the key. The games themselves are about conflict and conflict resolution. So the genre means making conflicts specific to that genre, repairing a spaceship, surviving a hostile planet or alien creature, navigating a strange culture, negotiating, that kind of thing. And the science fiction genre allows you to have a lot of scale difference, because you can have anything from, mega structures built the size of a planet, saving the galaxy, all the way down to Tron's microchips scale, or just how do we get off this space station alive?
Yeah.
It gives you a lot of opportunities to.
One of my former guests talked about this, that if he wants to play fantasy, he can do that, but he can't play sci-fi in fantasy. But if he wants to play sci-fi, he can play fantasy in sci-fi. Every opportunity to put in the flavor of the day. If you want to find a strange low-tech planet with tribes, you can do this. If you want to fly into Neon City, like a huge Blade Runner city or cyberpunk-ish space station, this is also the possibility, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I like to in sci-fi, hard sci-fi for me is like the science and the realistic feeling and the deadliness in this genre. I really appreciate, and often it isn't the antagonist or the monster or something like that. Like I play a lot of Aliens, so the artificial intelligence, for example, or the environments, like your spaceship are drawn too close to a star, and you cannot escape from the gravity of this star, and you have to launch your escape shuttles or something like that, right?
Absolutely.
That's epic.
What is the hard part of playing in sci-fi genre? We have touched a bit on it earlier, and the preconception of technology and the setting are one of the problems, or could be one of the problems. How do you manage players' preconception and assure that everybody are playing the same movie as we touch
on before.
And which other challenges do you see in this genre?
The shortfalls or the challenges, I think, for hard science fiction is you give the players a lot of tools that they can use in unexpected ways to overcome challenges that you set for them. You know, if everybody has a teleporter or a replicator or a battery that never runs out or communications that can reach the other side of the galaxy, you then have to think very carefully how you're going to present a situation where they can't just sidestep it with that technology. And you also have to be on the same page with what technology is available, because we're talking about games which are at least near future or far future, so they're going to have advanced technology. And if one person is expecting to be able to teleport, well, it's not really what you had. It's not really what I had in mind. They're like, oh, well, how do I address this problem then? You have to think a bit more creatively than that. So making sure everybody's on the same page with what's available.
Yeah, because the Star Trekness or the Star Warsness or the Dune-ness, all these iconic IPs affects the player's understanding of the sci-fi concepts. So how do you create a commune preconception of sci-fi with the players? So all the players are playing the same movie. So one player isn't playing Pitch Black, and one is playing Star Trek, and one is playing Blade Runner. How do you do this?
I think one of the ways to do it is to make a shopping list. That's always a good way of doing it. So if you've got a book where it already has, equipment that the player characters can use, then that's obviously very easy. Or you might have to make it yourself, but if you can show them, you can buy a railgun but not a laser rifle, or you can buy a long-range communicator, but it can't do faster than light communication. Those are the kind of times where you could say these are the constraints, but this is what's also available to you. No, you can't have a jetpack, but yes, you can have like anti-radiation pills. So a shopping list kind of shows the players what technology is available. And if you decide to put a currency alongside it, you can also show which technology is expensive or rare and which is easy to acquire.
There's a lot of systems and settings where they have long equipment lists, as you said, and pricing and so on. But often I find these equipment lists difficult to players to have a concept of what to look for and what the tech level is. So how do you communicate to your players? How do you give the players the right picture of the technology level, and where in the many versions of sci-fi the right conception of what kind of tech level and technical possibilities you want to give your players?
One trick I've found is to put an NPC with the players at the beginning, because people tend to, if they're in an unfamiliar situation, they tend to copy what other people do. So if they have an NPC, let's say it's Mutant Chronicles, and they say oh, we really need to tell, the settlement that they're in danger. Quick, let's go. And, he's not like, pull out your phone and ring them up. That I think is the prompt where the players understand, oh, well, if the NPC thinks we have to physically deliver the warning, then obviously that's what we have to do. If there was an easier way, we would have done it. So I usually use that as a kind of like a cheat to have an NPC to show them. And usually the NPC will either betray them, die, get kidnapped, or pulled away on another duty once the players understand the setting, so that they can then do everything without someone holding their hand.
Have you ever tried to play like a IP which are very conceptualized, like Star Wars or Star Trek or Aliens? Even if the players know this setting, they know where the tech level and what the possibilities within the tech level of this IP.
Yeah, I played a lot of Warhammer 40,000 based RPGs. So yeah, and I had one player who was like a 40k nerd. He knew everything, and I definitely had another player who had never played it before. And so it helps then, obviously, because you have a player who can help the other player out.
So you use your players to identify a bolt gun, a laser gun, and explain to the other players how traveling and how the monsters, the genie stealers, and so on exist in this universe.
That's right.
When you're playing Dark Heresy and Rook Trader.
No, it was mostly Dark Heresy and a little bit of Rogue Trader.
Yeah, I played both games, but I think Dark Heresy is more easy to comprehend and work into a game.
I think the Dark Heresy was definitely far more engaging. The stakes were a lot more personal, whereas Rogue Trader was a bit distant, and it didn't grab me or the players as much.
So Dark Heresy is more like Cyberpunk, actually, for most part.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk
with a lot of dangerous religion.
yeah, for sure. And gene stealers. Well, that's a failure. When you have this right concept understanding as the GM, I tend to find the immersion is very easy, but if the immersions are off balance, I often find the story could stagnate or even derail because the players haven't find the right balance between the technology, and we all want to play in this setting. Have you any tools to not derail or not stagnate a campaign, like a sit down or anything like that?
Anything that can't be worked out at session 0, I think it just needs to be slow introduction, because it's very easy as a games master to be excited about the game you want to portray and run and show the players, and just like hit them all with it in the face and go, yeah, here we go, what do you want to do? And they're like, whoa. If a player, I think you're right about the stagnation. It usually happens when players don't know what they can and can't do. And if you keep saying, oh, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that, they stop asking. And that's easy to stagnate, trip over, and that's when your game stops.
Yeah.
So just very slow introduction. If it's an important element, do it one thing at a time. Do fusion power in the first one, and lasers in the second episode, and food capsules in the third one. Some things are just going to be flavor, other things are going to be important, and otherwise space. So because we're talking about science fiction, space stations and spaceships are one of my favorite things about it, because it's so easy to control the player's exposure to the game, because it's like a dungeon in fantasy in that there are corridors and rooms.
Yes.
But you can't just leave,
No.
because you can't breathe outside. So it's the perfect opportunity to start them on space station or spaceship and say, this is what you can do. Anything beyond that, you'll have to wait until you're in a different location. It is very easy then for the GM to control their exposure to things. Start them in the engine room. This is the engine room. Then if they go to the bridge or they go to something, and then someone will say, "Oh, there's no teleporter pods." No, there aren't. I've showed you. There's the escape pods. There's the shuttle bay. There's the hangar with the rover. These are the things that are available to you, and just introducing them step by step.
That's pretty cool, because it's a very, very tempting to as a player, look at the genre and say, "Woo, we have a spaceship and we fly all over the galaxy." But when we are captured inside your spaceship with no engine and the alien is on board, you have a problem, and you have to solve whatever problem with your engine or the gravitation of the sun or whatever. There's a lot of railroading actually in the mechanics of the genre.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say it's the same as the mechanics of a new game. If your players have never played Mothership, I'm not going to tell them about the stress table until they need to know about the stress table. The panic rolls. They don't need to know how how to hire a mercenary until they meet a mercenary. So in the same way, they don't need to know how the fusion drive works until they need to interact with the fusion drive. I don't need to show them a diagram of this is how a ship's engine works. So if it breaks, this is the parts you need until it breaks. That makes sense.
Such a great point, Rook. Famous last words. The sci-fi genre, why is so well suited for role-playing, like immersive role-playing? How do you make this genre shine for you?
I think it's I know I said before about the scale and how you can visit different places very, very easily. If you take like the common trope, here's a desert planet, here's a jungle planet, here's a water planet, you can just drop the players into a different area. So it depends on what your players are after, but it's very easy to pick something from a science fiction genre and just turn that into what the players want to see. It's like you said before, you can play fantasy in the sci-fi genre, but you can't play sci-fi in a fantasy genre. Yeah, it has a very, very big table to pick from.
How do you make the characters more immersive in the story? Why is sci-fi well suited for immersive play?
For the NPCs?
Yeah, no, all the characters in your game are. How do you make them immersive and invested in the story and the setting? Why is sci-fi so well suited for this?
Well, I think because you have so many anchors for a character. So whether a character is tied to a world or an ideology or a faction or a spaceship, or something like that. Again, you have such a broad range of options in front of you. If it's the player characters, you can get them attached to a spaceship if that's what they own, or you can get them attached to an NPC. I think I had when I started that number campaign, they had rescued an artificial intelligence, which was illegal in the setting. You are not supposed to have them. And they were trying to keep them away from the people who wanted to control them and turn them into, something terrible that they were going to use. So that was something that drew all the characters together. And it also meant that they had antagonists who were anchored to the same thing as the players, just but for a different reason. So, we want to protect this artificial intelligence. They want to control it. So you have the same thing. We want to protect our spaceship, but you stole your spaceship from a crime organization that wants it back. So there you have an anchor that you share with an NPC. And that means that the players have connections with NPCs. So when they bring them up, they can relate to them on a level. They both have something that's important, but for very different reasons.
It sounds like a competition, but but where do you see the hard sci-fi genre, especially to be more suited for this kind of anchoring immersive play? Why is this so great for you?
If you compare it with fantasy, I think the constraints are a bit harder. So with fantasy, if you have magic, for example, you can do anything. But that doesn't really make an interesting conflict or story, because the answer is always magic. How did this go wrong? Probably magic. Well, how can we fix it? Well, probably magic. Whereas in science fiction, okay, there's a plague that's ravaging this colony. How are we going to fix it? There's no one answer. You can say technology, but that may not be the case. What if you have an argument between two different cultures that you need to negotiate? How are you going to fix that? That's probably not going to be technology. There's no technology to make people agree. Whereas in a fantasy game, you can we can just charm people or brainwash them or introduce this thing and magic up a solution to make everybody happy. Yeah. So I think it's, despite the fact that having more technology gives the players more options, it also sets more constraints, because you're saying, well, this is hard science fiction. You can't just get a replicator or a laser sword and fix everything with that magical piece of technology.
Do you know the setting Eclipse phase?
Yeah.
Where they're using the 3D printer to the max.
Well, yeah, it's similar. There's one of the games I love called Lancer, which is about giant mecha combat. That is all about 3D printers. That's how you get your mecha and how you repair it. But it doesn't take away from the human element of the stories, which is what it's about. Because, you can print machines, you can print clothes, you can print houses, but you can't print happiness.
Nope.
That's still out of the range of technology.
One of the cool things about hard science for me when I'm GMing it, it's like the characters are more real and not as distorted by weird races or magic, for instance. So immersiveness is much easier for the players, and and if the immersive is easier, it will be more intense. It's my experience.
Definitely.
And the story is easier to tell with the players, because we are playing humans. We know how a human feel. We don't know most of us don't know how it is to live on a spaceship or space station. But we have a pretty good idea of how a human feel like in most cases, and
Absolutely.
how we get stressed and how we get claustrophobic in tight corners in a spaceship and so on. Is this something you work with to put the humanity in the game and put feelings through the characters are not distorted and distracted by a sci-fi setting, but still playing humans? Do you have any experience doing this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think even if I run a fantasy game,
yes,
I tend to do a human-centric game, because...
Me too. It's much easier to relate.
Yeah, definitely. And in science fiction, doubly, because, like you say, we all know how humans work and react and feel. And I think if you had, in fiction, I think the reason why it's easier for people to connect with something like Game of Thrones than it is Lord of the Rings is because they're all human characters. They have families, they have feelings, they have friends, they have rivals, they have hatreds, they love and they despise things in the same way we do. Whereas if you're talking about elves or dwarves or the undead, it's like, well, I don't, how can I connect with that character? I know you do get science fiction where you can play, an uplifted octopus or an alien or a robot, but that is very, very difficult, I think, to become immersive, because you end up playing a pastiche or, a corny version of it. So yeah, I definitely tend to run human-centric games, especially in science fiction. And then you have tropes you want to avoid, like, aliens are just people in rubber masks, or, all AI is basically evil. You could replace, like, the Lich from a fantasy game with an AI, and instead of skeletons, he's got an army of robots. That's not how AI and robots should work,
Sure.
It should be something different.
AI has to be scary on another level.
Right. Because you don't know how it thinks. It's an intelligence that doesn't work in the same way that you do. It will have priorities that you can't fathom. And as a games master, it's very difficult to get that across to the players.
Oh yes. In the Alien games, there's the mother on all the ships, and my players, the ones that played with me several times in the Alien cinematic scenarios, they know that Mother is always the bad guy, not the alien, not the android, not freaking computer in the corner who will lock the doors and shut down the faster than light travel engine and so on if she wants to. So that's the scary part. It's easy to relate when we're talking about dog food in a near presence of another guy. This guy get a commercial for dog food next time he watches YouTube. Mm-hmm. If you multiply this scariness like 10,000, you might grasp the scariness of a real AI, as in Aliens and other sci-fi games.
Yeah. As an aside, the one thing that really bugs me in science fiction films is often the way that robots are presented. Where you have a robot that is damaged, and then you can tell it's trying really hard to do something, but it's injured. It's like, well, no, that's how an organic being works. But if it's a machine, it can either do it or it can't. It doesn't limp, it doesn't struggle, it doesn't put extra effort, and it just does it. So if you cut the legs off the robot, it's just going to walk towards you on its hands. And then when it gets to you, you cut off its hand, it's just going to use its other hand. It's just the machine. It's going to perform its task. And as a human, you can't relate to it. It doesn't have the same motivation or emotions or thought patterns that you do. Like you say, that's what makes it scary, because you can't negotiate with it, you can't communicate with it, and you can't think on the same level as it.
You have a great point. The AI is a force of nature. The environment, the space is a force of nature. And in the Alien games and other sci-fi games like Mothership, there is an alien force which you can't interact with in a diplomatic way. You can't figure it out. You can't do it. It just make the players press together and make them think, make them run harder, and the game will be very intense, because it's this force, this unrelentless threat will always pressure the players.
Absolutely.
As a game master, we all love to tell stories, and we all have our favorite system, setting, or universe to tell these stories in. Rook want to tell us why the Mothership system and setting is so great for sci-fi. In this segment, Rook want to tell us about Mothership and the system especially. He want to tell us how to use the system in this genre and why the Mothership system and partly the setting are great to telling stories in the sci-fi genre. Tell us, why is Mothership your foremost favorite game in this genre?
I really, really love Mothership. I think partially because I also love running horror games, because it's very easy to elicit emotional reactions. Although you do have to be responsible when you're doing that. You don't want to elicit the wrong kind of emotional reaction. Mothership has very, very easy to learn rules, and you only have to learn them really one part at a time. You don't need to know everything. So you don't play a wizard that needs to know every spell in the spellbook to make an intelligent choice, so that you don't end up being an anchor to the rest of the party. You can just learn bits and pieces. It gives you a lot of prompts with its trinkets and its patches and things like that for your character generation. And the official modules and the third-party modules are absolutely overflowing with ideas. That whole blue-collar worker in space is a very easy way to get players involved in a science fiction setting that may or may not be familiar to them, because you can say, okay, well, you're probably familiar with what a welder does, right? So imagine a welder, but they just have to work in zero gravity in a spacesuit. That's where you are right now. So it's very easy to integrate new players, and experienced players often come back to it because maybe they are masochists. They enjoy having their players sent crazy or being thrown out an airlock or eaten by an alien.
Yeah, it's a great point.
But, yeah.
I like the way the skill tree is conceptualized and how the XP systems work into the game's structure. But how are you using the XP system when the system is this deadly, and as we touch on in the last segment, the environment and the aliens and dangerous AI? How do you make your players survive, and how did you conceptualize and use the mechanics of XP?
So one of the core tenets of Mothership, I think, when it came out, and definitely it's developed over time, was that choice of save, solve, or survive. So you can, save the day or save yourself, save your the people in trouble. You can solve the problem, or you can survive the adventure. And depending on if you have your GM is very mean or very lenient, you might be able to accomplish one or two of those things, but never all three. And so what I like to do is to give player characters experience points for doing those things. And if their character is a Marine, then they get more experience for saving. And if they're a scientist, they get more experience for solving. So you have kind of like a role within the party. And this is something I found from another Mothership player who has like a proper codified system for it. It's inspired. It's very clever. And that if your character dies, that's fine, because you can use that experience points that you gained from saving, solving, or surviving. Well, not surviving if your character died, but you can use those experience points on your next character. So it allows you to, you like you said before, you can have a series of mini campaigns instead of one giant campaign. And it may not be the same characters, but it is the same story. And yeah, it sucks if you have a player character and you've really invested in them, you want to develop them and they die. But I think that the best advice I ever read about players, I think it was from Blades in the Dark, was that you should play your character like the way that you would drive a stolen car.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
So, you don't have to make them to last. You just want to enjoy it as much as possible. Drive it at top speed, go through red lights, because that's how you have fun, right? You don't have fun by playing it safe and making sure you always take the middle option and sitting on the fence. That's not going to be an entertaining game.
It's just a great analogy, because if you are playing the scientist and you have these alien artifacts like in Event Horizon, the common thing will be to put it in the airlock and blow it out in space, but you will not. The story will stagnate, and the story will not be as interesting. And so what if my scientist character dies or gets insane and shoots up the ship and the other players? It's a great story, and take this way to play your character. You can derive the story with the other players and with the GM, and that's just a great dynamic in the system, built in the system, that if you lose your character, if it dies, you can build another and continue the same progression, stats wise and system wise. That's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, the Alien movie would have been a very different film if they saw the eggs and thought, "Oh no, let's not touch them."
Yeah, that's just a great point.
So,
like in Alien 2, if they landed on with the shuttle and they saw there was nobody here that just left in the shuttle again, there wouldn't be any movie.
Yeah, exactly.
No, you won't get any XP.
The Mothership setting isn't fleshed out like a lot of other settings, like the Alien setting or the Dark Heresy setting. It's more like a sandbox for the GM. There's a few pointers and anchors and help, but in the whole there isn't that many fixed points. So how do you use this setting in the genre?
I like it because it has enough things that are familiar that the players can easily drop into it, but enough things that are strange and hostile that the players can still react to it. So you have corporations. Okay, we have corporations today. Yeah, but these ones literally don't care about the individual. They care about getting the alien specimen on board. They care about interfacing with the artificial intelligence. They care about restarting the reactor core on this dead space station. So the players can understand most of what they're seeing, but it still leaves room for the fantastic, the new, the strange.
As I see it, Mothership has enough detail, but not too much, which gives the GM and the players room to define their own version of the setting.
Exactly.
And still Mothership have a lot of themes and flavor and texture to dive into. It's just a great and easy setting to launch a game in.
Yeah, and it is a horror game, but there is so much room for comic relief and a sense of humor to it as well. So it doesn't have to be constantly, because if you just play straight horror, players can get overwhelmed by it. So there is still room for you to do something just a little bit silly to give them the opportunity to laugh. You don't have to be serious 100% of the time.
For sure, the players need these spots of daylight in the darkness, and because they will toughen up and the scariness will be less scary next time you try anything. Therefore, using a slapstick comedy relief or Christmas dinner where they share gifts and something like that, it's such a great way to let the players breathe, and then you can press on again with more horrific stuff. How do you build a tense horror story in space? What is your tools for this?
It's restricting where the players can go. It's you can't leave because your hyperdrives are broken, or you're stuck on this space station because you don't have a spacesuit. It's the timer, the ticking time bomb, or the safety glass in the laboratory is getting broken by the specimen that's behind it. Anything like that is a countdown or a restriction to the player's movements. It's far scarier to be stuck in a maze than it is to be in a maze that you can jump out because it's only knee high. And if you're in a maze, then that also gives the games master the opportunity to use the quantum ogre whenever he wants, because there's no way out that's pre-decided. So if you have a scene that you really want and you're on a derelict spacecraft, you can pretty much put it anywhere, regardless of which direction the players go.
The Ogrin, if you are Warhammer 40k, right? It's called. The confinement tool is one of the best tools in these horror stories, and it gives a lot of opportunity for the GM. Another tool I like to use is the best choice of bad option, as I call them. Let the players make a hard choice among no good options. Is this a tool you are using, and which tricks can you give us in this genre especially?
So yeah, it's a very good point. I'm glad you asked, because I think that definitely plays to the save, solve, survive methodology, the kind of philosophy behind Mothership, in that you will be able to accomplish some of these objectives, but not all of them. So if I am coming up with a scenario, or if I'm working with a published scenario, I will try to get at least two kind of events running at the same time. So the players will either feel like they're constantly spinning plates, we jump over here and keep this. Oh, no, we have to go back over here. Or they have to focus their efforts entirely on one column while the other column completely falls down.
I don't know if you're familiar with the game Mass Effect. No, okay. It's a fine computer game, like a little bit space opera, a little bit hard science. It's like there's a scene in the game where you fight through a lot of bad guys, blah blah blah, and then these bad guys have launched two nuclear missiles through two bases, two settlements. The one settlement is where the factories and the work and colonies' livelihood is focused, and the other missile is heading for the settlements where the people live, which are working at the factories. So you have to make a choice now as a character. Which missile do you want to stop?
Okay, yeah, I'll have to look that up.
When you're using this system and the setting, which kind of players are you looking for? What's the good player in your campaign?
So I firmly believe that everyone is responsible for their own fun, that you shouldn't be waiting for the GM to serve you fun on a plate. Everybody can help each other have fun, but if you're sitting there and you're thinking, I'm bored, it might be because you're not engaging as much. So I think my favorite players are the ones who are very proactive, the ones that ask questions, talk to NPCs, lift up the carpet to see what's underneath, open the box, push the button, pull the lever, that kind of players. If you're not inquisitive about what the games master has put in front of you, then you basically are just watching a slideshow. You need to be engaged. And if you engage in the creative process of it, let's say that the games master talks about walking through a cyberpunk style nightclub or a bar, and one of the players says, "Oh, and my character jumps onto the arcade machine and plays this arcade game called," he makes up a name for it. You're like, "Oh, brilliant! Yeah, great." As me as a GM, I like that because I'm going to write that down. And maybe later an NPC is going to talk about the high score they got on that game, and you have a rivalry. And it's just a little thing, but if you're bouncing ideas off each other, that's so much better than just existing in the world that the GM made. And the GM says, no, this is my story. You be quiet and listen to me. That's not an interesting game for me.
Yeah, one of the mantras in this podcast is that the players has the same responsibility as the GM to creating the story and telling the story.
Yeah, and the more I was exposed to the kind of Powered by the Apocalypse games, the more I've introduced them to games, because, like you say, when you give the players the pen, so to speak, they will just run away with it, and you're like, well, that's much better than what I would have come up with. Brilliant. Yeah, let's keep that. That's fantastic.
That's for sure. I like to use the analogy. I'm holding the canvas, and I'm holding the picture, and I have painted some of it, and then the players are able to put in a lot of creativity and so on, but I'm still holding the canvas, so I can stop or have some reasonable control within the limits of our communion in the story, and I think that's perfectly fair. It's, as you said in the beginning, I'm also the player, and the other players may not what one of the players are drawing on our picture together.
Yeah,
so
it's something difficult you have to work with. Yeah.
That was all I have for you today. Thank you a lot for joining me and nerding out in this sci-fi genre and Mothership and Quantum Ogres. And it was great talking to you, and I will really want to talk to you again in some capacity in another subject or more sci-fi. Thank you for this, Rook.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was great.
Thank you for listening, and thanks to Rook for guiding us through this small corner of the sci-fi genre. In next episode, we will explore more of this genre. I'm going to look forward to that. Follow us on Facebook, GM Workshop, the podcast. If you want to interact with us and talk to us, give us a message